Have any of you heard the story about Crystal Skinner? Crystal Skinner was an honor student at Rutgers University. She was preparing to graduate this year. She was well liked by her colleagues and her co-workers. When she hadn't shown up for work for a few days, her co-workers got concerned and looked into why she didn't show up for work. And police discovered her body in her apartment. She was stabbed 30 times in the chest by her living boyfriend, Troy Y. The witness was their 2-year-old son who told police, their 2-year-old son John, who told police Troy hit Mommy. Now I wonder what made Troy Y do such a horrific thing, and I wonder how this will affect 2-year-old John as he becomes an adult. Today I'm going to talk about domestic violence. The story that I just told you is true. It was in the Philadelphia Inquirer on April 2nd. Skinner's body was found on March 26th. Much of the research that I've conducted is through CCP's database, and a lot of the statistics and other data that I'll be referring to is taken from Legal Momentum's website. Legal Momentum is the oldest legal advocacy organization in the United States, and they focus on freedom against domestic violence toward women and girls. Much of the information that I'll be referring to is also obtained through various websites of organizations that advocate against domestic violence. Today I'm going to talk about what domestic violence is, its causes, and its effects. When I refer to victims, I will be referring to women and children. This is not to put men down, and I know that none of the men in this room would ever do such a horrific thing. However, statistics show that the majority of domestic violence is done against women and children, and this is a serious issue and that needs to be addressed. First, I'd like to start with a brief statement made by Senator Dianne Feinstein as she addressed the President and Congress in October of 2004 during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I will read one of the paragraphs she read from. Domestic violence causes far more pain than the visible marks, bruises, and scars. It is devastating to be abused by someone that you love and think loves you in return. It is estimated that approximately 3 million incidents of domestic violence are reported each year in the United States alone. Tragically, domestic violence remains a pervasive threat to the fabric of America's families and the well-being of America's future. Now, I'd like to talk about what domestic violence is. When you hear those words, what do you think of? Probably physical force. You're right, that is domestic violence. However, what most people don't realize that domestic violence usually begins with covert behaviors, and that also includes emotional abuse, which is just as abusive as physical violence. In a recent survey that I conducted, one of the questions that I asked was, do you think it is abuse when one person controls all the money in a household without their partner's consent? 3 out of 9 people were not sure. Well, the answer to the question is yes. And to back myself up, you can go to Women in Transition's website and see for yourself. Women in Transition is an organization that educates and advocates against domestic violence. And on their website, they list what is referred to as the power and control wheel, and it lists different types of abuse. One of these is economy abuse, which is defined as taking a person's money or not letting someone have access to family income. Did you realize that domestic violence affects 44% of women at some time in their adult lives? That means it's a pretty good chance that it may have already happened or could happen to the women in this room as well as myself. According to the National Organization for Women, 4 women die every day as a result of domestic violence. That's 1,400 a year. Now I'd like to talk about some of the causes of domestic violence. Do you think that maybe children exposed to domestic violence, such as Johnny Way, they could become abusers themselves as adults? Well, according to the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence, it is learned through observation, experience, culture, family, and community. The Women's Crisis Line states that boys who witness domestic violence as children are much more likely to become abusers as adults than those that come from nonviolent homes. Social attitudes also contribute toward women, toward domestic violence toward women. Lisa Locke of the University of South Carolina and Charles Richmond of Wake Forest University conducted research, and what they found in that research was that scholars and journalists both agree that the American patriarchal society contributes to it. Men are relieved for their responsibility of abuse, and sometimes the behavior is condoned, and violent victims are also blamed. It's also believed that domestic violence is a private family matter and should not be interfered with in the public sector. Now that I've explained the causes, I'd like to talk about some of the effects of domestic violence, and I'd like to start with children. According to the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence, statistics prove that it affects children emotionally, behaviorally, socially, and physically. They have higher risk of alcohol and drug abuse, juvenile delinquency, language problems, stress-related symptoms such as ulcers, rashes, and headaches, hearing and speech problems. They also have difficulty in school, including problems with poor concentration and academic performance, and difficulty with peer interactions. Now, I'd like to talk about how domestic violence affects women. Physically, as far as physical health issues, Jacqueline Campbell, who is a professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, did research herself, and what she found was that these women usually suffer from gastrointestinal problems, and they complain of cardiac symptoms such as hypertension and chest pain. Battered women also are 3 times more likely to suffer from severe depression. Many of them become jobless. They lose time from work to seek medical and legal help. According to the now Legal Defense and Education Fund, studies show that 50 to 80% of these women miss time from work to seek the legal and medical help. Over 60% arrive late because of abuse. Their batterers usually stalk them and harass them by phone, and they end up losing their jobs. An example of this is Vasiliki Giannakos. Vasiliki was attacked by her boyfriend brutally a few days after she had started a new job. She told her employer she would need to take a few days off from work to seek legal and medical help. Well, a few days later, her employers fired her from her job. Legal Momentum, which is the legal advocacy organization I mentioned earlier, they acted as her legal counsel. She filed a lawsuit, and she won her case on the grounds that her termination violated the anti-discrimination provision of New York City's human rights law. Now, domestic violence also contributes to homeless women and children. In studies done, it was found that 50% of homeless and women and children flee because of abuse. The National Coalition for the Homeless Report in 2007 reported that a woman has nowhere to go when she leaves an abusive relationship. Shelters are filled to capacity and must turn away many battered women and children, the reason being lack of funds. Discriminatory practices by landlords are a barrier for women. Another example I'll give you is a story about Miss R. Miss R preferred to remain anonymous. She was evicted, Miss R lived in the same apartment building as her former partner, who continued to harass her and at times even abuse her. There was one incident where the building security guard was called in to intervene. The batterer shot the security guard, who died. When the police arrived, he lied to them and told the police that he still lived with his victim, and in turn, the landlord evicted the victim. Well, once again, Legal Momentum acted as her general counsel, started to sue the landlord. They started the proceedings, and the landlord dismissed the eviction and allowed the woman to move back into the apartment with her children. I hope I've been able to help you gain a clear understanding about what domestic violence is, its causes, and its effects. It usually begins with emotional abuse and covert behaviors, which leads to physical violence. Some of the causes are that when children witness domestic violence, they could potentially become abusers themselves as adults. And social attitudes such as the patriarchal system contributes to domestic violence. Some of the effects are that children and women are affected physically, emotionally, and mentally. Women lose their jobs and become homeless with their children. I'd like to recap on Crystal Skinner's story, the story that I started with earlier. She was murdered, as you may recall, she was murdered by her living boyfriend, Troy Wine. Their 2-year-old son, Johnny, witnessed the murder. How sad for Johnny to see such a horrible thing. I wonder what he'll be like when he grows up. Could John potentially abuse his partner as an adult, or even murder his partner when he grows up? I don't think this is a behavior that most fathers would be proud to have their sons learn from them.